Hello and welcome to this episode of The Effects Loop. I'm your host, Jay Byrne. Today we're going to do something not that much different, but a little bit different from what I usually do. I'm not going to be playing today. I'm going to let the pros do the playing in this episode. We're going to do my top 5, and I mean this is not a definitive list. This is 5 guitar solos that, for me personally, I feel these 5 guitar solos are 5 of the greatest guitar solos ever recorded. There's many more that can be added to this list, and I know people are going to be like, oh, you missed this, you missed that, you missed this. But I think these 5 really are, for me, some of the greatest guitar solos ever recorded, ever put down on tape, because all of these guitar solos were recorded on tape, so it kind of tells you they're going to be a little bit older as far as that stuff is concerned. But I've got an order here. I actually came up with an order for this. I mean, it's not definitive, like I said. I mean, don't take my word as gospel. But this is my order as to how I feel, 5-to-1 type of thing. But yeah, and because of YouTube's copyright stuff, this video is gonna get dinged with copyright. There's no way I'm gonna get around this video without getting hit with copyright, so I am just gonna let these guitar solos play. So you're gonna hear the full guitar solo for every single one of these choices. Out of respect for these guitar solos, I can't cut them up. I can't cut them into pieces. So I'm gonna talk about it. I'm gonna give you some technical information, guitars, amps, that kind of stuff, and then you're gonna get to hear the solos. So all right, so let's get started with this, okay? My number 5, and most people would put this as a number 1, but I'm putting this as a number 5 because I have a number 1 that I really want to talk about. The number 5 awesome guitar solo, one of the greatest guitar solos ever recorded, is the guitar solo to Stairway to Heaven, okay? This was on Led Zeppelin's 1971 album, Led Zeppelin 4, okay? Actually, it's also known as Ruins. It doesn't actually have a 4 on the album, but it is Led Zeppelin's 4th album. Some people call it Ruins, some people call it Led Zeppelin 4. It's Led Zeppelin 4. It's the one with Black Dog, Stairway to Heaven, Battle of Evermore, Misty Mountain Hop, lots of good stuff on that album. But the guitar solo was played by Jimmy Page, who was the guitarist for Led Zeppelin. He actually recorded the solo using his 1959 Dragon Telecaster, which is interesting that he used the Telecaster. Well, he said he used the Telecaster because he wanted the solo to have like a bite to it. So he actually recorded it with the Telecaster. He recorded it, he used, as far as amps are concerned, he used a Supro Coronado 1960T. So a small Supro combo is what he used. He played his Telecaster, his Dragon Telecaster, through that Supro Coronado. And yeah, I don't know. This is one of the greatest guitar solos of all time. It's an amazing solo. It's simple. Most guitar players can learn how to play it and play it pretty good, but it's just the phrasing of it is near perfect. So here you go. Here's Jimmy Page playing the guitar solo to Stairway to Heaven from Led Zeppelin 4. Now we are on to number 4. In my number 4 slot is one of my all-time favorite guitar players. The song is Sweet Child of Mine. The band is Guns N' Roses. The guitar player was Slash, okay? It was on the album Appetite for Destruction from 1987, okay? But the solo to Sweet Child of Mine is a really cool guitar solo. It starts off melodic, and Slash has this way of exploding into like these fast, I don't know, bluesy licks. The way he plays his solo, he has his own style, okay? But he has his way of exploding into those licks, and yeah, it's very evident in this guitar solo. This nice, long, dragged out guitar solo that just builds and builds and builds to this like crescendo, and it just explodes into this like powerful like cloud of notes. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's really great. He used, when they recorded Appetite for Destruction, a 1959 Gibson Les Paul replica that was made by a local luthier named Chris Derrig. Okay, so that was the guitar that Slash was playing in the studio when he recorded Appetite for Destruction, pretty much the whole thing. He played it through a modified 100-watt Marshall Super Lead, a 1959 T. Now, this was a very specific mod. There's a lot of controversy and history and legend around this amp that he played in the studio for Appetite for Destruction. It's literally like the tone that people have been trying to like chase for years. But apparently it was a modded Marshall Super Lead, 100-watt Super Lead, and it was rented from a local LA, amp rental place. And I guess the story goes that Slash actually did, I think he like stole the head or something like that, and eventually had to give it back, or eventually it was discovered that that was the head that was stolen, and it was taken back from him like years later when they were touring for Appetite for Destruction, I think. I'm pretty sure that's the story. I know Slash really talks about it in his book. But I love this solo, Sweet Child of Mine. Here it is, number 4, Slash playing the Sweet Child of Mine solo. Now we are on number 3. My number 3 solo here is a guitar solo that every time I listen to it, I say, God, this is amazing how good this solo is and how well it serves the song. You're going to notice that with these solos. I mean, they're not all insanely technically proficient, but they serve the song really well, melodically and whatever, however you want to describe it. But my number 3 slot here goes to Mr. Crowley, okay? The song Mr. Crowley from the album Blizzard of Oz by Ozzy Osbourne, released in 1980, all right? Now, this solo was played by Randy Rhoads, the great Randy Rhoads. I mean, how could Randy Rhoads not be on a list of greatest solos ever recorded? However, the Mr. Crowley solo is incredible. It's so melodic. It's fast, but it's melodic, and it builds, and it's the tail end of the song, and it's just, I mean, when you listen to the song Mr. Crowley by Ozzy and you hit the solo at the end, there's so much emotion in the notes that Randy Rhoads is playing, and it's just an awesome guitar solo. It's one of my favorite guitar solos of all time, and yeah, it deserves to be on this list. Randy Rhoads played his 1979 Carl Sandoval Flying V, the polka dotted Flying V. When you see pictures of it, it's like white with polka dots on it. That was designed by a guy named Carl Sandoval, who actually made it for him. In the studio, he recorded it through a modded 1959 Marshall Super Lead Plexi 100. All right, so basically he was using a plexi. A lot of these guys used a lot of the same equipment because these were the amps that were popular at the time. But it was a modded 1959 Marshall Super Lead. So then again, if you have a Marshall Super Lead, you can get close, but it's not going to be quite the same because it has some kind of mod done to it, which affects, I think it was called a Cascade mod, which affects the gain stages. Randy was also known for using an MXR Distortion Plus to kind of kick the amp into like really thick, fat distortion. So he used other things as well, but that is basically what he used in the studio when he recorded these parts, and that's what you're hearing. So here is my number 3 slot, the guitar solo from Mr. Crowley. Here's Randy Rhoads playing the end solo on Mr. Crowley. We're winding down here. We are at my number 2 slot. And what would my number 2 slot be? What do you say? 2 and 1 are almost interchangeable. However, they're both amazing and they're both very similar. There seems to be a theme here. Aside from Stairway to Heaven and Sweet Child of Mine, the last 3 solos are like solos that play out the rest of the end of the song. They usually fade out on the actual track, and they just play out the rest of the song. But my number 2 slot is the guitar solo at the end of Hotel California by the Eagles. 1976, that album was released. And the guitar solo was played by Don Felder and Joe Walsh. And from my research that I found, Don Felder played his 1959 Les Paul Standard through a 50s Tweed Deluxe, okay? And Joe Walsh played his 70s Fender Telecaster into a Fender Tweed Champ amp, So combos. They were using combos in the studio. And there is a phaser effect on Joe Walsh's guitar solos at the end of this. You can kind of tell the difference between the Don Felder stuff and the Joe Walsh stuff. They battle back and forth. Don Felder's is the smoother stuff that starts out the solo, and then Joe Walsh kind of comes in, and you can hear this slight phasing effect on Joe Walsh's actual guitar, so you can tell what's Joe Walsh and what's Don Felder. But I mean, this is one of those guitar duel type solos at the end of a song, and it's amazing. If you really listen to it, it serves the song so well, and it's one of those classic 70s songs, you know, like Stairway to Heaven and the first song that's on my list, which I'll talk about in a minute, that has those great dueling guitar solos at the end. You know, those solos that you can't change a note of. When these bands play these solos live, they play them virtually identical to the album because you can't change that much of them because they're perfect. They sound great the way they are. But yeah, so my number 2 slot, Hotel California by the Eagles. Here is Don Felder and Joe Walsh playing the guitar solo at the end of Hotel California. All right, we've reached number 1. We're at the end of the list here. And my number 1, which is, you know, none of these choices are, I'm not going deep with these choices. These are just amazing guitar solos, and they're thought of as amazing guitar solos. They're on like every guitar solo list you could ever look at, but they're thought of that way because they are incredible guitar solos. They've always been incredible guitar solos, and, you know, people listen to them and go, wow, that was good, you know? So my number 1 slot, here we go. Freebird by Lynyrd Skynyrd, okay? It was off the album Pronounced Lynyrd Skynyrd that was released in 1973. Now this is an interesting song because technically speaking, the end of the song is played by Alan Collins and Gary Rossington, the two of the guitar players from Lynyrd Skynyrd. However, Alan Collins played the entire solo himself. According to Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, they worked out the solo together, and then he played the whole entire thing himself, all the parts, because he was just doing such a good job. I mean, they said Alan Collins was an amazing guitar player, and he was just banging out the solo. They just let him do the whole thing, and it came out amazing, and it sounded awesome. So, yeah. So according to Gary Rossington, Alan Collins played the entire solo himself, including all the overdubs, and that Gary Rossington played the rhythm that's going on in the background. Alan Collins played it on his Gibson Explorer. It was a 1958 Gibson Explorer that he's seen very wide. You see a lot of pictures of him playing and live footage of him playing that Gibson Explorer. And as far as the amp is concerned, I had a little bit of a hard time trying to track it down. It's possibly a Marshall, probably a Super Lead, or a PV Mace amp, because he did use PV Mace amps later. Skynyrd was known for using PV amps down the line. A lot of Southern rock guys used the PV amps. 70s PVs. But there's conflicting information about that. You go on, some people say he was using Marshalls early on, and some people say he was using PV. I think it was probably a Marshall. It was probably a Super Lead of some kind, and they just used to crank those suckers and play the solo, and that's the sound that you're hearing. So here's Alan Collins and Gary Rossington, but Gary Rossington's just doing the rhythm in the background. Oh, and Gary Rossington was playing his Les Paul on the rhythm track in the background. And yeah, so here's Alan Collins, Gary Rossington playing the solo at the end of Freebird, one of the most classic guitar solos of all time. I mean, this is one of those guitar solos that is ingrained in your memory. You sing along to it. Same thing with Hotel California and Stairway to Heaven. I mean, those songs, you hum along to the guitar solo. People wait for the guitar solo at the end of Freebird. If they go see Lynyrd Skynyrd, or if they're listening to Skynyrd, they're waiting for this guitar solo. So here's the guitar solo at the end of Freebird, played by Alan Collins on his Gibson Explorer through probably a Marshall Super Lead of some kind. So here you go, Freebird. All right, there it is. There's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a kick out of it. I hope you enjoyed listening to those solos. I hope maybe you learned a little bit of information about how those solos were played and what they were played on. I did my best to get that information so that it just wouldn't just be a straight up top 5 list without all that kind of information on it. So yeah, thanks. I hope you enjoy it. If you like this kind of content, like, subscribe, leave me a comment, hit the notification bell so you know when I got new videos. I'm Jay Byrne. This is the Effects Loop. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.